forward, roared Axertinum Admiral X Gramasnade, spurring his army onward into the barrage of radiation, used the shields and overrun them. On his command, the front line of the Axertinum swarm deployed something which had never been conceived of in the galaxy prior. Mirrored shields capable of bouncing standard radiation attacks. Soldiers of the Galactic Council's capital city on the world of Pt7 began dying in droves, and only the knowledge that retreat or surrender would see them even more certainly slaughtered kept them from throwing down their weapons and surrendering on the spot. Axertinum didn't do mercy. When Axertinum High Command had seen what happened on Eloclam's ship, they had immediately moved up their timetable. Without the quantum collapse missiles, their military dominance in the long term could no longer be assured, so they instead opted to strike while the iron was hot. 3 flagship-class battleships and their escorts had descended on Pt7 within 10 minutes of Eloclam's demise, and the Axertinum poured out in a swarm. The Axertinum soldiers poured out of the ships and into the city, racing through the streets with their weapons set to constant discharge and not a care who they killed in the process. Their orders were clear. No survivors. An hour later, they had cleared over half the city and were now closing on the council building where the Galactic Council Guard had set up barricades and were making their final stand. It wouldn't save them, not now that the Axertinum had deployed their secret weapon. The shields that would make them untouchable and allow their swarm to advance as they had in ancient times before developing higher intelligence. A tide of Admiral X Gramasnade raised his upper right manipulator to his communicator node, High Command. This is Admiral X Gramasnade. We have cleared the city and pinned the council in their building. I have ordered deployment of the shields. This will be over shortly. Good work, Admiral, replied a voice that made Admiral X Gramasnade's mandibles quiver. You shall be richly rewarded for this victory. Do not disappoint me. Yes, Your Highness, Admiral X Gramasnade replied in numb shock. To think the Queen Mother herself was paying attention to this battle. His cardiopulmonary functions doubled in speed, and he urged his troops forward with a chittering war cry. For the Queen! For the Quiesian, Moo! Screamed his warriors back as they surged forward. Nothing can stop us now. Admiral X Gramasnade screamed. First the council, then the galaxy. It must be noted that the rest of the galaxy had no concept of what on Earth was known as Murphy's Law. So when the transporter beam dropped a Class 6 Death Welder with an artificial iron carapace covered in iron claws, between Admiral X, Gramasnade's army and the Council Guard's barricade, one George Murphy had quite a lot to do explaining it to them. It was not a gentle lesson, as the first 6 lines of the Axertinum forces, and quite a few Council Guardsmen would attest. The Synarch assault the Death Welder unleashed rendered an estimated 1,200 soldiers unconscious from pure undilated fear in the first second, and that was before the war cry. That would have sent most of the galaxy's most feared apex predators scampering for cover. Admiral X Gramasnade took a step back in terror, an action that would forever shame him if he lived through this. How could something no bigger than we are make a sound like that? Then he shamed himself further by taking another step back as the Death Welder all but flew into the ranks of his soldiers, striking with such force that an entire stack of his elite soldiers were bodily hurled back, only their comrades behind them preventing them from flying further. Every time the Death Welder struck a shield, the crystalline silica that formed it shattered, and the aluminum that formed their backing crumpled. Then the Death Welder snatched up 2 of the shields, with the soldiers they belonged to still holding on, and started swinging them in wide sweeping arcs to simply mash into paste every Axertinum that got within his range. When the shields broke, they shredded whatever poor soldier. The Death Welder broke them over the head of, and the Death Welder simply grabbed another. If the soldiers he caught didn't have shields, he used them as bludgeons. If the mangled corpse he was swinging wasn't hitting hard enough for him, he simply struck with his manipulators, carapaces shattered under those iron-clad bludgeons, and the iron claws appeared to have been designed to rip carapaces clean off, leaving only bloody exposed innards behind. In the space of a minute, the Exertanum advance had been completely halted, and now the Council Guard were recovering their wits and realized the monster wading through the invading army was on their side. As soon as they figured that out, radiation started flying anew, and even more Exertanum started dying. By the end of the 3rd minute, Admiral X Grimasnard found himself wishing that Exertanum had a word for the order he wanted to give but didn't know the words to phrase. If the Exertanum hadn't thoroughly alienated every other species in the galaxy, someone might have been able to tell him that the word he was looking for was retreat. Then what looked like 50 more of the monster appeared in a blaze of transporter beams. And even if the Exertanum didn't have a word for it, retreat was exactly what they did. Not that the monster was letting them go unmolested. If anything, running seemed to only excite the beast more, and as they learned to their horror, that thing was a lot faster and more agile than they were. Admiral X Grimasnard didn't get to live with that shame though. The monster had singled him out as the leader, and the final straw that broke the Exertanum's spirit came a moment later. The monster sprinted back towards the Council Guard's barricade, a little nearly giving them all their respective versions of a concerted heart attack in the process, and then turned and took off faster than anything land-based species they'd ever seen. The creature leapt over the heads of the retreating Exertanum army, landed on Admiral X Grimasnard, and ripped his head off. Then it hoisted the Admiral's head like a trophy, and unleashed that terrifying war cry again. In a way, the Exertanum's orders were carried out. There were no survivors on their side.